Hi, both. Thanks for joining us today on our Business Gurus channel, where we will be discussing key business topics to help students grasp the most important elements of their course in preparation for their exams and future career. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You're here because you want knowledge fast, but you won't settle for just scratching the surface. We take your sources, cut through the noise, and give you that pure, actionable insight. Today, we're digging into something pretty fundamental to how companies work: organizational structures. You know, we've all seen those charts, right? The boxes and lines showing who reports to who. But the real question, the one we want to tackle for you today, is really practical. Why does that chart actually matter for your job, for what you're accountable for day to day?
Yeah, exactly. Our mission here is to take this topic, which can seem a bit dry, let's be honest, and make it feel essential. The sources you sent over are great because they really get straight to the point, focusing on the practical side of things. We need to define some key terms, sure, but really we want to pull out the immediate benefits, those four core reasons why a good structure makes a difference.
Okay.
Oh.
And the starting point, which, like all the business sources seem to agree on, is pretty simple.
Yeah.
All businesses have to organize what they do somehow. You just can't grow or even repeat things reliably without some kind of internal logic. It's unavoidable.
And that internal logic is the organizational structure. That's our main key term for today, really. Think of it as the blueprint. It dictates how tasks get divided up, how they're grouped, how everything is coordinated, formally. Without structure, you don't really have a business. You've just got a bunch of talented people probably bumping into each other trying to get things done.
Okay, let's use that term, the blueprint. I like that. So we're starting with the idea that structure is a tool, right? Meant to reduce confusion, make things smoother. But instead of just saying efficiency, let's drill down into those four specific payoffs you mentioned earlier. What are they?
Absolutely. So the first big one is functional clarity. Basically, a clear structure makes it much, much easier to see which part of the business does what. Think about the opposite, right? A
Yeah.
new project kicks off and suddenly like three different teams think they own quality control, or even worse, nobody thinks they do.
Right.
Chaos.
Yeah, you get turf wars, wasted effort, things falling through the cracks if those functional lines aren't clear. But that clarity needs to go deeper than just departments, doesn't it? Down to the individual.
Precisely. And that leads us straight into the second benefit, role clarity. A well-defined structure makes it easier to see who has which specific job role. And really crucially, who's accountable for what outcome. If I know my job starts here and ends there, I can actually focus my energy on that.
Sure.
Without that clear definition, people are constantly working in these fuzzy, overlapping areas. It just slows down decisions.
Okay, that sounds great in theory. But hang on a sec. If companies define roles and functions so strictly, why does it often feel kind of messy anyway? Doesn't drawing all those boxes and lines sometimes create silos, barriers that actually slow communication down?
That's a common worry, and it brings us neatly to the third benefit, which tackles that directly. Communication efficiency. Now, lots of people assume hierarchy automatically means slow communication, blockages. But our source material suggests the opposite can be true if the structure is clear. See, if the reporting lines, the authority, are well-defined, information has established kind of trusted channels to flow through, messages don't just scatter everywhere based on who you happen to know. They go, ideally, straight to the right person, the decision maker. It minimizes noise and wasted time. It's more about precision, maybe, than just raw speed.
Okay. That makes sense. So it's about the quality of the path the information takes. If you know exactly who needs to know something, you don't bother everyone else. And that seems to lead right into the final pillar, the fourth one, which I think is maybe the most important for, the individual listener.
Right, which is individual responsibility awareness. The sources really hammer this point home. Employees should find it easier to be fully aware of their roles and responsibilities. When you have that functional clarity and role definition we talked about, you as an employee understand your specific piece of the puzzle, how you contribute. And that certainty, well, it reduces ambiguity, cuts down on job stress, and lets you really focus. It's that confidence of knowing, okay, this is my lane and I know what I need to do within it.
Okay, so let's quickly recap that bit. Structure isn't just some chart on the wall. It's like the operating system that should deliver functional clarity, role clarity,
Yep.
communication efficiency,
Right.
and that individual awareness. It's foundational.
Absolutely foundational. Okay, so now, To keep those four pillars strong, especially when a business grows or, changes direction, managers need ways to talk about and analyze the structure itself. And that brings us to the vocabulary, the specific terms we need.
Right. This is where we shift gears a bit from why structure is needed to the different types of structure. The terms in our sources, these are like the architect's tools for designing and critiquing organizations. Let's make sure you walk away knowing what these words really mean when you see them.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the most basic shapes, the sort of vertical layout. We mainly talk about tall structures and flat structures. So a tall structure basically has many layers of hierarchy, lots of levels between the boss at the top and the people doing the day-to-day work on the front lines. Picture a really steep pyramid. It often means managers are only supervising a few people each.
Okay, tall, like a skyscraper.
Yeah,
And flat is obviously the opposite. Fewer layers, a shorter distance from top to bottom.
exactly. Much shorter chain connecting the CEO to the staff.
So what are the immediate implications? Why pick one over the other? What's the trade-off?
The choice is always a trade-off, and it links directly back to those four pillars we just discussed. A tall structure usually prioritizes functional and role clarity. Because you have so many levels, jobs tend to become quite specialized. Processes often get highly standardized. This can work really well for big established companies where, control, consistency, and maybe reducing risk are super important. Think banks or government agencies, maybe. The downside, though, the cost of tall structures is usually communication efficiency and speed. Information has to travel up and down through all those layers, which naturally slows things down, decisions take longer, and that individual awareness might suffer too because employees can feel kind of distant from the top, from the overall strategy.
Okay, so tall gives you control and clarity, but you sacrifice speed. Makes sense. So if a company needs to be fast, more adaptable, they probably lean towards flat then.
They often do, yes. A flat structure tends to boost communication efficiency quite a bit because there are just fewer layers for messages to pass through, fewer gatekeepers. It also often increases that sense of individual responsibility awareness because employees usually get more empowerment, broader roles. Information zips around more horizontally, faster. You see this a lot in startups, tech companies, or any business in a really fast-moving market where being responsive is key. But, and there's always a but, the challenge with flat structures is keeping those other two pillars strong. Functional clarity and role clarity can get a bit blurry. Managers in flat structures often supervise a lot of people, and if roles aren't super clearly defined, accountability can get spread thin, managers get overloaded, and it can become unclear who actually owns a task.
So the choice really depends on the strategy, the market, what you're trying to optimize for.
Okay.
Now, within these shapes, tall or flat, how does authority actually flow? That brings in the next couple of terms, right? Chain of command and hierarchy.
Correct. Hierarchy is really just the overall system of ranking. Who's senior to whom, based on authority, responsibility. It's the big picture map of power. The chain of command is more specific. It's the actual line of authority itself. It clarifies exactly who reports to whom. Ideally, it runs unbroken from the very top level right down to the entry-level positions.
So if the chain of command is long, you've got a tall structure.
Yep.
And if it's short, the structure is flat. It sounds like they're almost different ways of describing the same thing.
They're very, very closely linked, yes. The length of the chain pretty much determines the tallness or flatness. Think of it this way. If you want really tight control, you make the chain longer, tall, so every step gets supervised closely. If you want to empower employees more, you shorten the chain, flat, pushing decisions down closer to where the action is. The chain of command is sort of the enforcement mechanism for the structure's basic choice between control and autonomy.
Okay, clear. And that leads us to the last key term, which sounds a bit more technical, like a metric, span of control. What's that measuring?
Yeah, span of control is all about management capacity. Simply put, it's the number of subordinates that a single manager can effectively and efficiently supervise or direct. This number is actually a crucial factor in deciding whether the structure ends up being tall or flat.
So let's say I'm a manager supervising just like 3 highly specialized people doing complex work. My span of control is narrow.
Exactly. That's a narrow span of control. And if you have lots of managers with narrow spans, you inevitably need more layers of management overall to cover everyone. So a narrow span naturally pushes the organization towards being tall. This often makes sense when tasks are really complex or non-routine or maybe involve sensitive information, needing that close individual oversight. On the flip side, a wide span of control means a manager is looking after a large group of employees, maybe 20, 30, even more sometimes. Now, this is generally only workable if the employee's tasks are more standardized, more routine, and they don't need constant direct supervision. A wide span directly cuts down the number of management levels needed, which pushes the organization towards that faster, leaner, flat structure.
Ah, okay. That's the real practical insight there, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you want to speed up communication, become more flat, you pretty much have to widen the span of control. But doing that means giving up some of that close supervision and maybe some of the role specialization you get with a narrow span. That's the tension.
That's the fundamental strategic tension, exactly. The sources really show that designing a structure is all about making trade-offs. You simply can't maximize all four of those pillars, functional clarity, role clarity, communication efficiency, and individual awareness, all at the same time perfectly. If you go for extreme functional clarity with a super tall structure, you're almost certainly going to slow down communication because that chain of command gets so long.
So putting it all together, those 5 key terms we covered, tall, flat, chain of command, hierarchy, and span of control, they're basically language we use to understand how leadership decides which benefits to prioritize based on, what the company's trying to achieve.
Precisely. If we zoom back out to the big picture, every leader, really every informed employee, should understand this kind of structural equation. The structure isn't static, it's a choice, constantly being adjusted, hopefully, to solve the problem of coordinating work effectively. And this vocabulary lets you decode what priorities might be driving those choices in your own organization.
So what does this really mean for you listening right now? Fundamentally, your company's structure is that living blueprint for how work gets done, how information flows. If you can figure out, is my company generally tall or flat? Do managers seem to have a wide or a narrow span of control? Then you can start to predict its likely strengths. Maybe it's super clear, or maybe it's really fast, and also its potential weaknesses. But let's leave you with a final thought, something to chew on, building on these ideas. We know a clear structure is vital, but what happens when a company grows really fast hits a kind of critical point. Imagine they're forced towards a choice. Either maintain tight control with narrow spans, leading to a potentially bureaucratic tall structure, or embrace speed and empowerment with wide spans, risking an overloaded, potentially chaotic flat structure. Which of those paths, tall or flat under pressure, do you think is more likely to cause a complete breakdown of those 4 foundational pillars we talked about? Functional clarity, role clarity, communication efficiency, and individual awareness. Which is the bigger risk? Something to think about next time you look at your own org chart. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We hope this look at organizational structure gives you that edge you were after.
Thanks to both of you for joining us today. You've been listening to the Business Gurus. Let's now hand it over to you. What further questions do you have based on what we've discussed so far? Leave a comment and we'll get back to you right away. If you haven't already, hit that follow for more business tips.